Humans are immune to psychological warfare. Part 1. The Intruders and Their Fatal Miscalculation. A welcome to another space story, the podcast where we pause the world, drift into the cosmos, and let curiosity carry us beyond the stars. I'm your host, Henry, and I'm thrilled you're tuning in tonight. In this episode, we're diving deep into a story that explores the very limits of human resilience. One that will challenge your perceptions about who we are and what we're capable of when pushed to the brink. It's a story of humans at war. Before watching this story, please like, subscribe, and don't forget to press the bell icon so you never miss a discovery. Let me know in the comments, where are you watching from? What time did you watch this video? Sleep well. Dream far with hope. Not with weapons or technology, but with something far more insidious: psychological warfare. It's a story where aliens try to break us, only to find that we're immune to their tricks. And in the end, their manipulations backfire in ways they could never have imagined. Now, imagine a world where humanity has been discovered by an alien race, a race with the technology and knowledge to bend our minds, manipulate our thoughts, and invade our very dreams. Their initial tactic? Fear. The kind of fear that can make your heart race, your thoughts scatter, and your will to fight evaporate. Of what if we told you that, instead of breaking us, their attempts only served to make us stronger? This is the story of how humanity stood unshaken in the face of terror and emerged victorious against beings who could only understand fear in its most primal form. Tonight, you'll hear about how they tried to break us with fear, and we laughed. Stay with us as we explore the mystery of an alien race that underestimated humanity's greatest strength: our ability to endure, to laugh, to see beyond the darkness, and ultimately to triumph. Now, let's begin. Let's step into the stars and look at a future where humanity defies the odds, outwits the invaders, and shows the galaxy what we're made of. The first encounter, the alien mistake. It started with a signal, a series of radio bursts, at first imperceptible, then increasing in intensity, sending waves of static across every human monitoring station on Earth. The Oteri, a race of ancient and highly intelligent beings, had been watching us for millennia. Silent, calculating, and patient, they had watched our species rise from primitive hunters to creators of vast civilizations. And with that observation came one conclusion: humanity was a species ripe for manipulation, a species whose psychological vulnerabilities were as vast as our technological potential. To the Oteri, humans were a puzzle they could solve with ease. After all, they had studied us from afar, our wars, our internal struggles, our constant battle with fear and self-doubt. They saw our history of atrocities, the darkness in our hearts, and our repeated cycles of violence. They believed that if they could push the right buttons, we would crumble. The Otari knew that fear was the most powerful weapon in the universe, and they were ready to use it. When their ships arrived in the skies above Earth, they didn't need to invade. They didn't need to fire a single shot. Instead, they unleashed something far more subtle, far more devastating. An assault on our minds. The first wave of their attack was psychological, directed at the very core of who we are, our deepest fears, our nightmares, the things we try not to think about in the quiet moments. They bombarded us with visions, images crafted to invoke terror. They showed us apocalyptic futures, endless wars, destruction, death. Our minds were invaded, our dreams shattered. For a while, it seemed as if the Otiri had succeeded in their manipulation. People woke in cold sweats, unable to shake the horrifying images that had been implanted into their thoughts. But here's where the Otiri made their fatal mistake. They underestimated us. They misunderstood the very thing that had allowed humanity to survive for so long, our ability to adapt, to grow stronger in the face of adversity. Fear, not our weakness, but our strength. At first, people were afraid. It was natural. It was the instinct to fear the unknown, to feel overwhelmed by the weight of the visions thrust upon them. But then, something remarkable happened. Instead of succumbing to despair, humans started to talk about it. We shared our fears, our nightmares, our experiences. And what began as isolated terror soon became a collective defiance. People didn't hide in fear. They confronted it, examined it, and shared it. It wasn't long before people began to laugh. At first, awkwardly, unsure of how to react. But then, the laughter grew, a contagious sound that spread across nations. They tried to break us with fear, and we laughed. They showed us nightmares, visions of the end of the world. And yet, there was something in the human psyche, something ancient, that refused to cower before these visions. The collective strength of humanity's spirit, forged through centuries of hardship, began to shine through. What the Otari didn't account for was the human tendency to thrive on adversity. Our history is a litany of struggle, wars, famines, plagues, disasters of all kinds, and yet we persist. In the darkest moments of our past, we've always found a way to laugh, to rebuild, to overcome. It's in our nature. And so the alien psychological attack, far from breaking us, began to have the opposite effect. People started to see the alien visions for what they were. Nothing more than distorted reflections of our own fears. The images they projected, the nightmares they broadcasted, were no different from the horrors humans had faced throughout history. We had already lived through our worst nightmares. The aliens' fear tactics were mere echoes of our own past struggles. And so, we laughed, not out of mockery, but out of sheer defiance. We laughed because we had seen it all before. Wars, we'd survived them. Famine, we'd endured it. Natural disasters, pandemics, and the darkest parts of our history, we'd faced them head on. Fear had no power over us. It never had. The psychological war intensifies. Frustrated, the Oteri escalated their efforts. They intensified their broadcasts, introducing more complex psychological tactics. They manipulated our senses, altering the fabric of reality itself. People began to see figures in the corner of their eyes, hear voices in their heads. Their attempt to confuse and destabilize us only deepened their misunderstanding of human nature. They didn't realize that the more they tried to manipulate us, the more united we became. We shared our experiences openly, discussed the strange phenomena, and in doing so, we normalized the chaos. The Oteri believed they could break us by creating confusion, by fracturing our sense of reality. But instead of dividing us, it brought us closer together. What the Oteri didn't understand was that humans are fundamentally social creatures. Our strength lies not just in individual grit, but in our ability to connect with one another. The more they tried to make us doubt our reality, the more we reinforced each other's sanity. It became a collective battle of the mind. And as we laughed together, as we shared our stories, as we supported each other, we became impervious to their tricks. Approximately, turning the tables. Eventually, the Oteri realized their failure. They had tried to use our fear against us, only to learn that fear was not a weapon that could break the human spirit. Instead, it was something we could turn into fuel, something that powered our resistance. We had survived millennia of hardship, and the aliens had underestimated our capacity for resilience. In the end, the aliens didn't conquer us with their advanced technology or psychological warfare. They failed because they couldn't understand the true nature of humanity, our will to survive, our ability to adapt, and our unshakable strength. In their attempt to destroy us from within, they created a force that no weapon in the galaxy could defeat. Humanity's greatest weapon wasn't our technology, our armies, or our weapons of war. It was our minds, our ability to endure, and our capacity to find hope, even in the darkest of times. The Oteri may have had the power to manipulate reality, but they could never break our spirit. Part 2. The Tides Turn. The Oteri's Realization. The Oteri, after weeks of intense psychological manipulation, began to notice something unsettling. At first, they thought their strategies were simply taking time to sink in. But as days turned into weeks, the cracks in their plan became evident. The first sign was subtle, a change in the way humans reacted to their broadcasts. What had once been fear and terror began to morph into something else. Curiosity. Humans, once desperate and broken by the invasive nightmares, began to analyze the alien assaults with increasing sophistication. The Oteri had assumed they could overwhelm us with fear, but in doing so, they triggered an entirely different response. The human instinct to understand, to question, and to adapt. In a way, they had miscalculated on a fundamental level. While the Oteri had great knowledge of the human psyche, they didn't understand its true depth. They didn't realize that in our darkest moments, we don't just surrender. We fight back, not with force, but with intellect, creativity, and resilience. The Oteri, who had watched civilizations fall apart from the inside out, expected humanity to crumble under their pressure. Instead, we began to build something stronger than ever before: unity. But how did this shift occur? What was it about human psychology that allowed us to endure and then outsmart the Oteri? To understand this, we need to look deeper at the mysterious facts of human resilience. Facts that the Oteri could never have predicted, with all their knowledge and technology, failed to grasp it. It starts with the fact that we, as humans, experience fear on a different level than any other known species. Fear, in its most primal form, is a survival mechanism. It's hardwired into us. But what makes us unique is our ability to process and reinterpret fear. While most species see fear as something that must be avoided at all costs, humans seem to have a curious relationship with it. When faced with fear, we don't just react. We analyze. We learn. We adapt. We find meaning in the chaos. This ability to reinterpret fear is tied to a phenomenon known as cognitive dissonance. In short, humans have a remarkable capacity to reconcile opposing beliefs, emotions, and experiences. When the Oteri tried to force their nightmares upon us, instead of breaking us, our minds twisted the fear into something more manageable. We learned to laugh at it, because in doing so, we reasserted control over it. One of the greatest unsolved mysteries of human evolution is the phenomenon of humor. What makes humans capable of laughing in the face of death or at the darkest of situations? We often think of humor as just entertainment, but what if it's actually a psychological defense mechanism? A way to disarm fear and render it harmless. Could this, then, be the very thing that made us immune to the Oteri's manipulation? Were the aliens unknowingly dealing with a species that had evolved a psychological tool designed to withstand terror itself? These questions began to circulate among Earth's greatest minds. What had seemed like a simple act of defiance, laughing in the face of fear, was actually a complex defense system. One that not only helped us endure, but helped us gain the upper hand. And soon the Oterii would realize they had made an enormous error in judgment. Turning the tables, humanity strikes back as humans began to share stories of how they had resisted the alien manipulations. A collective response emerged. People began to learn from each other, share their coping strategies, and develop new mental techniques to counter the alien attacks. These were not physical tactics. No weapons were being fired, yet slowly but surely humanity began to reclaim its agency. The psychological war had entered a new phase. It started with subtle acts of resistance. People who were sensitive to the Oterii's mental probes began to map out the frequencies, figuring out how to block the intrusive signals. Psychologists and engineers, previously working in separate fields, found common ground. Together, they began to develop technology that could dampen the psychological broadcasts from the alien ships. But more importantly, humans started to weaponize their greatest advantage, their minds. A new form of resistance emerged, a psychological counterattack. It wasn't enough to simply resist the alien-induced fear. Humanity needed to strike back. And in the same way the Oterii had manipulated fear, humans began to use that very same fear as a weapon. What if, instead of cowering before the Oterii's nightmares, we used them to our advantage? What if we could project our own visions of humanity's strength, of our past triumphs, of our resilience through centuries of suffering? As humans began to send out their own broadcasts, visions of unity, of endurance, of the human spirit in its most powerful form, the Oterii began to feel something they had never experienced before. Fear. The same psychological tactics they had used to manipulate us now turned the Oterii, for all their technological prowess, lacked one key element that humanity possessed in abundance: the will to resist, the ability to turn the tide in the face of impossible odds. While the Oterii had seen empires fall before, they had never encountered a species like humanity. We didn't just survive under pressure. We thrived. Unresolved theories. What makes humans unique? As the tides of battle shifted, many began to question, what was it about humanity that made us so resilient? What hidden powers did we possess that could render us immune to the most sophisticated psychological warfare? Could this have been the result of an ancient evolutionary adaptation? Or was there something more profound at work? Something that science, even alien science, had yet to uncover. One theory suggests that the key to our resilience lies in our connection to the unknown. Humans have always been a species of explorers. From the moment we first gazed at the stars, we've been fascinated by the mysteries of the universe. Could it be that our ability to endure was linked to an inherent curiosity, a drive to explore, to solve, to understand the unfathomable? Another theory, whispered among the scientific community, speculates that humanity may possess a psychic connection to the universe. This theory is unproven, of course, but it's one that has fascinated researchers for years. Could it be that humans, on a deep, subconscious level, are attuned to the cosmos in ways that other species, alien or otherwise, cannot comprehend? Could the Oteri have underestimated our connection to the very fabric of reality itself? These theories remain unresolved, but they add an intriguing layer to the mystery of human resilience. And as the Oteri's manipulation began to unravel, it became clear there was something far more powerful at play than just the strength of the human mind. Something ancient, something cosmic, something the Oteri had never even considered. The battle of minds, the final confrontation. The Oteri, realizing their psychological assault was failing, attempted to escalate the situation further. They sent out more advanced mental probes, trying to push humanity to the brink of collapse. But with each attempt, they only faced stronger resistance. Humans, once on the edge of fear, now stood unified, pushing back with newfound mental fortitude. And as the Oteri continued their efforts, they discovered Part 3, the breaking point. The Oteri's panic. The Oteri had always prided themselves on their ability to manipulate and control. For millennia, they had conquered countless worlds, bending entire civilizations to their will through advanced psychological warfare. They had learned to target weaknesses in the minds of their enemies, pushing them into states of fear, hopelessness, and despair. For most species, this tactic was foolproof. But humanity was proving to be something else entirely. What had started as a brilliant plan to dismantle human society from within was now unraveling. With each failed attempt to terrorize us, the Oteri grew increasingly agitated. They had underestimated the human psyche in ways they couldn't comprehend. Every assault they launched, whether it was nightmares, confusion, or fear, was met with defiance. And the more we resisted, the more empowered we became. In fact, the Oteri were starting to feel the effects of their own psychological warfare. It was an ironic twist. The more the Oteri ramped up their attacks, the stronger the human spirit grew. Humans began to fight back, not with technology or weaponry, but with something far more powerful: their minds. It was as if every attempt to break us only forged us into something stronger. It was a mental war, a battle of wills, and the Oteri were losing. They began to panic. What they didn't know was that the mind was a far more complex battlefield than humans had a unique ability to turn that fear into strength. Every time they tried to push humanity further into despair, we found ways to fight back. But what was truly terrifying to the Oteri wasn't just our resilience. It was the collective power of humanity's unity. The collective mind, a force like no other. As the Oteri continued their mental assault, something remarkable happened. Humans began to come together, not just physically, but mentally. People across the world started to develop a shared consciousness, a collective mental resistance. It wasn't telepathy, but it was something just as powerful. By sharing their experiences and coping strategies, humanity started to form a psychological network, a web of interconnected minds. This collective mind, born out of necessity, began to pool its resources and strength. Every person who resisted the Oteri's mental influence contributed to the whole. In small towns and sprawling cities, in rural villages and technological hubs, people began to share their mental strategies. Some practiced meditation to block out the alien signals. Others learned to laugh in the face of fear, to laugh until the terror lost its grip. It wasn't just resistance, it was empowerment. And in this shared defiance, humanity found a new weapon: the power of the collective will. As people united mentally, their thoughts began to synchronize, amplifying their individual resistance into something far more formidable. What had once been a battle of isolated individuals against an unstoppable force had now become a war fought by billions of minds, working in harmony to push back the alien invaders. Oteri, who had believed they could divide and conquer by assaulting our minds, were now faced with an overwhelming, unified resistance. The more they pushed, the more they found themselves bogged down in a mental battlefield they could not escape. The reversal. Humans go on the offensive. As the Oteri's mental power began to falter, humanity shifted from defense to offense. No longer content to simply resist, people began to use the very methods the Oteri had employed against them. It started with small steps, mental pushes, subtle alterations in the alien broadcasts, minor disruptions in their communication networks. Then the tides of war began to shift. Psychic warfare, once their domain, was now humanity's territory. As we gained control over our own minds, we started to invade the Oteri's thoughts, disrupting their communications and sabotaging their plans. They had tried to plant nightmares in our minds, and now we were planting visions of our own. We weren't just resisting anymore. We were actively challenging their existence, bending their own tactics to our will. But how? How did humanity, a species that had only just begun to unlock the potential of its own consciousness, manage to outwit beings who had perfected psychological warfare over millennia. It was an unexplainable phenomenon, one that perplexed the Utiri. Some believed it was humanity's inherent connection to the universe itself. Others speculated that it was our strange relationship with chaos, a trait that had allowed us to survive against overwhelming odds throughout history. The truth, however, may lie somewhere in the uncharted depths of the human mind, some ancient, unrecognized aspect of our consciousness that could not be measured or controlled by any alien technology. Whatever the cause, the result was clear. Humanity had gone from being the target of the Utiri's manipulation to becoming the aggressor. We had turned the tables. A final breakthrough in their desperation. The Utiri decided to launch their final, most potent psychological weapon. A universal fear broadcast, one that would blanket the entire Earth, driving every human into madness. This was their last chance to break us, to plunge us into total despair, and make us bend to their will. They believed that if they could project an image of absolute and utter destruction, one so horrific that no mind could withstand it, they would succeed where all their other efforts had failed. What they didn't anticipate was the power of the human psyche in its most vulnerable state. For the first time, the Utiri succeeded in creating a fear so intense that it threatened to shatter the mental fortitude of humanity. The vision they projected was a nightmare beyond imagination. An endless black void, swallowing entire galaxies. The screams of the universe echoing in the background, and humanity itself being wiped from existence in an instant. It was everything the Utiri had hoped for. And yet, instead of driving us to madness, something unexpected happened. People stood together, stronger than ever. The vision that was meant to break us had instead triggered an ancient, primal reaction in the human mind, a refusal to accept extinction. The collective will of humanity pushed back, a tidal wave of resistance that fought against the alien assault with an intensity the Utiri could never have anticipated. The Utiri's greatest weapon, their ultimate attack, had failed. What they didn't understand was that the very thing they had used to manipulate us, the concept of fear, was the one thing that could never truly control us. Fear was something we had mastered long before the Utiri ever arrived. The alien broadcast began to falter. The terrifying vision they had crafted began to dissolve, disintegrating under the weight of human resolve. Their communications cut off. Their ships, once vast and invincible, began to malfunction. The Utiri were, for the first time in their long existence, powerless. The final revelation, humanity's unyielding will. As the Utiri retreated, defeated not by superior technology or brute force, but by the sheer power of human will. A final question lingered in the air. Why? Why were we immune to their psychological tactics when so many other civilizations had fallen before them? Theories abound, but no one knows for sure. Was it something inherent in our DNA? Something encoded in the very fabric of our minds? Perhaps the answer lies in our history of overcoming impossible odds. Maybe it's our connection to the unknown, to the mysteries of the cosmos that no alien race can understand. Or perhaps, as some philosophers believe, it's because humanity, despite all our flaws, is bound by something more powerful than fear: hope. Whatever the reason, one thing became clear in the aftermath of the invasion. Humanity had proven itself more than capable of surviving in the most extreme circumstances. We had faced down the most advanced psychological warfare in the galaxy, and not only survived, we had won. Accept people, aftermath, and the ripple effect. The quiet after the storm. In the wake of humanity's victory over the Oteri, the world was left in an eerie calm. The aliens' mental assault had ceased, and their once dominant fleet lay scattered, stranded across the solar system. What had begun as an all-out psychological war against humanity had ended not with a single decisive battle, but with the slow, undeniable retreat of the invaders, undone by a force they could neither understand nor defeat: the human mind. Across the globe, celebrations erupted in cities and towns. People who had once been haunted by alien-induced nightmares now stood in the sunlight, victorious, their collective will stronger than ever. But even amidst the joy, a question lingered. What happens now? We had won, but at what cost? And more importantly, what would the Oteri do next? The war had been a battle of wills, not just of minds, but of ideas, ideologies, and beliefs. The Oteri had thought they could break us, reduce us to mindless fear, and yet they had underestimated a simple truth about humanity. We don't just survive adversity. We adapt, grow, and transcend it. Now, the world was left to pick up the pieces, rebuild, and move forward into an uncertain future. The psychological impact. Lessons learned. While the Oteri had failed, their psychological warfare had left scars. Humans had emerged from the conflict stronger, yes, but also more aware of their vulnerabilities. The Oteri's tactics had exposed deep flaws in human society, things we'd long ignored. Our reliance on technology had been shaken. Our mental defenses, once untested, had proven to be our greatest strength. But this strength came at a price. Psychologists, sociologists, and neuroscientists immediately began working overtime to understand the effects of the Oteri's attacks on the human psyche. The alien broadcast frequencies, while initially creating fear and panic, had also caused strange side effects. Some individuals who had been particularly sensitive to the mental probes began to exhibit unusual abilities. But some experienced heightened cognitive functions. Others, an increase in psychic sensitivity. Could it be that the Oteri's manipulation had triggered latent mental potential in humans, hidden deep within our DNA? The scientific community began investigating these strange occurrences. But for now, many theories remained speculative. Was humanity's immunity to psychological warfare a unique trait? Or was it the catalyst for something far greater? Something that could unlock even deeper capabilities in the human mind. If we had withstood an invasion of the mind, what could we accomplish now that we knew the true limits of our mental endurance? End of line. The Oteri's retreat. A new beginning? As the remnants of the Oteri fleet limped away from the solar system, broken and leaderless, a strange silence fell across space. For the first time in millennia, the Oteri were forced to retreat, their plans thwarted by the very species they had sought to conquer. But that silence, though it signaled victory, also carried a heavy weight of uncertainty. What had driven the Oteri to leave in such haste? They had been a nearly indomitable force, masters of psychological warfare. So why had they abandoned their plans so suddenly? The retreat of the Oteri left a haunting question behind. Were they merely defeated? Or had they discovered something in humanity that caused them to fear us? In their final moments, the Oteri had unleashed their most potent psychological weapon, expecting it to break us, but instead of achieving their goal, it only revealed something darker: humanity's untapped power. Could it be that in confronting us, the Oteri had inadvertently unlocked a force more dangerous than any weapon they could deploy? If they had miscalculated humanity's resilience, what might they have learned about us that would forever change the course of their interactions with our species? One thing was certain: the Oteri's retreat was not an end. It was merely the beginning of a new chapter, both for humanity and for the galaxy at large. If they had underestimated us once, there was no guarantee they wouldn't try again. Lingering questions. The mystery of human resilience. As humanity celebrated its victory, the questions about our own resilience only deepened. Why had we been immune to the Oteri's psychological warfare? What made us capable of resisting and even using the fear that they sought to exploit? Some argued that it was a quirk of evolution. Over the course of history, humanity had faced immense hardships: wars, famines, natural disasters, and had always found a way to endure. Perhaps this mental resilience was a survival trait, an innate characteristic that had evolved over millennia of adversity. In some ways, it could be argued that the Otiris invasion had simply triggered a dormant aspect of humanity's genetic makeup, our innate ability to resist psychological manipulation. Others, however, pointed to a more mysterious explanation. Could it be that humanity's resilience was tied to something deeper, something not yet understood by science? A small but growing faction of thinkers began to suggest that there was a metaphysical connection between humanity and the universe itself, a connection that allowed us to endure trials that no other species could. This theory was based on the fact that throughout human history, we've always sought to understand the unknown, to explore the boundaries of the universe, and to search for meaning in even the most difficult circumstances. Could this drive to understand the cosmos, to seek knowledge and meaning in a chaotic universe, have played a role in our ability to withstand the Otiris' fear-based tactics? In the aftermath of the war, these questions remained unanswered, but they were more important than ever. Humanity had survived, but the truth behind why we had been immune to the Otiris' psychological warfare was still a mystery that begged to be solved. And as we looked toward the stars, there was a growing sense that the answers might lie out there, waiting to be discovered. Home, humanity's place in the cosmos. With the defeat of the Otiri, humanity found itself at a crossroads. We had proven that we could stand against the most formidable psychological threats in the universe. But what did that mean for the future? What were the implications for humanity's place in the broader cosmic community? For centuries, humans had looked up at the stars with wonder, imagining the possibilities of life beyond our planet. Now, with the Otiris' invasion behind us, those possibilities had grown exponentially. No longer were we simply passive observers of the universe. We had shown that we were a species capable of not only surviving the unimaginable, but thriving in the face of adversity. This newfound confidence began to shift our perspective on space exploration. Instead of fearing the unknown, we began to embrace it. The Otiri had invaded us. Yes, but in doing so, they had inadvertently opened our eyes to the fact that humanity was ready for something greater. The war had made us aware of our vulnerabilities, but it had also revealed the untapped potential within us. We were no longer just explorers of space. We were warriors, thinkers, and survivors, ready to meet the challenges of the universe head on. With the Otiri gone, the galaxy was suddenly full of possibilities. But even as humanity began to plan for its future in the stars, there was still an underlying uncertainty. The Otiri were not the only alien species in the cosmos. Who else was out there? What other civilizations, more advanced and more dangerous than the Otiri, might be watching us now. And perhaps most importantly, what did our victory mean to them? For now, though, those questions were relegated to the future. Humanity had earned its victory, and we would savor it. But the journey was far from over. In fact, the real adventure was just beginning. The final mystery, the unknown next steps, as humanity prepared to step boldly into the future. Another mystery hung in the air. Despite all that had been learned about the Otiri and their methods, no one could quite explain what had made them retreat so abruptly. Was it fear? Was it an unexpected realization that humanity had the potential to rise above their influence? And then there were the whispers. The Otiri had left behind strange, fragmented data transmissions, encrypted messages that only the most skilled minds could begin to decipher. These messages, though incomplete, hinted at something even more unsettling. The Otiri had been only one part of a much larger galactic network. Who or what had been behind the Otiri's mission to invade Earth? What had caused their sudden panic? These questions, though unanswered, would shape the course of humanity's journey in the years to come. And then there were the whispers. The Otiri had left behind strange, fragmented data transmissions, encrypted messages that only the most skilled minds could begin to decipher. These messages, though incomplete, hinted at something even more unsettling. The Otiri had been only one part of a much larger galactic network. Who or what had been behind the Otiri's mission to invade Earth? What had caused their sudden panic? These questions, though unanswered, unsettled, would shape the course of humanity's journey in the years to come. For now, however, we stood victorious, our minds stronger, our spirits unbreakable, and the stars within our reach. The future had never looked so bright. Part 5. A New Dawn in the Cosmos. The Human Renaissance. After the war with the Otiri, Earth found itself at a crossroads. The dust had settled. The celebrations had died down. But there was no denying that something fundamental had changed in humanity. The Otiri had tried to break us with their fear, and instead, they had helped us unlock a new potential. But what was that potential, really? What had we learned about ourselves, and what did it mean for the future? This wasn't just a victory. It was a rebirth. ... The war, though brutal, had catalyzed a period of unprecedented growth and innovation. With the Otiri's assault on our minds now a part of our past, humanity looked inward and upward, realizing that the cosmos was no longer a vast, indifferent expanse. It was a place of opportunities and dangers. The first thing humanity did in the wake of the war was rebuild. But this time we didn't just rebuild what we had. We improved it. The world's governments, united by the global victory, initiated the human renaissance. A sweeping movement of technological, philosophical, and cultural progress. We had proved ourselves capable of surviving the most intense psychological warfare. And now, we would apply that same resilience to the challenges ahead. One of the immediate shifts came in the way we viewed space exploration. No longer did we look at the stars with mere curiosity. Now, we looked at them with confidence. We had faced the worst, and we had triumphed. We were ready to meet whatever came next. The era of passive observation was over. We would not simply be travelers in the cosmos. We would become active participants, sending our minds and bodies into the galaxy with a sense of purpose and unity that had never existed before, decoded with the help of human ingenuity and the new neural interfaces developed during the war, revealed unsettling truths about the galaxy's vast interconnectedness. The Otiri were not just a rogue species. They were part of something much larger. A galactic network of civilizations, each with its own methods of conquest and control. The Otiri had been the vanguard of a much darker purpose, sent to Earth not just to invade, but to test humanity, to gauge whether we could be subdued or whether we would resist. And the Otiri had learned, too late, that we would not be so easily manipulated. But it was the final transmission, the one left in fragments across the solar system, that intrigued humanity the most. The message was fragmented and incomplete, but one section stood out. It was a warning, and the words were chilling. You have awakened something. You are not alone. The implications of this message were both exciting and terrifying. Humanity had fought and won against the Otirii, but the transmission suggested that the Otirii had been only one of many species. Who were they working for? What did they mean by "you have awakened something"? This set off a new wave of speculation, one that pushed humanity to search deeper into the cosmos. The Otiri had been sent to Earth as part of a larger plan, but their retreat had revealed that something bigger was at play, something we didn't yet understand. A new kind of space exploration. As Earth shifted from recovery to renaissance, space exploration became a national and global priority. But this wasn't going to be the same kind of exploration we had attempted in the past. There would be no more timid, isolated missions. The Otiri had shown us how vulnerable we were. But they had also shown us our strength. Humanity was now determined to explore the galaxy not as a passive observer, but as an active participant, prepared for anything, aware of the risks, and resolute in our ability to survive. The first major initiative was the construction of the Odyssey fleet, a series of long-range ships designed for deep space exploration and defense. These ships were equipped with cutting-edge technology, including AI-driven psychological defense systems, quantum communications, and advanced energy shields capable of resisting cosmic threats. The ship's crews weren't just scientists and explorers, but soldiers, philosophers, engineers, and psychologists, trained not just to encounter alien life, but to understand and protect themselves from the kinds of psychological warfare we had experienced. The fleet's mission was clear: to venture beyond the solar system, to discover what lay in the vast unknown, and to prepare for whatever might be out there, whether allies, enemies, or something else entirely. For the first time in human history, we were no longer alone in the vastness of space. We were not just survivors. We were the harbingers of a new age of exploration, and we would not retreat in fear from what we might find. Psychic evolution, humanity's new frontier. While the Odyssey fleet prepared for their interstellar missions, something else was happening on Earth. An evolution, not of the body, but of the mind. The Oteries' mental manipulation had left deep traces on the collective human psyche. And although the alien influence had been broken, the changes in humanity were irreversible. People who had experienced the Oteries' most intense psychological assaults were now reporting strange phenomena: increased cognitive abilities, heightened intuition, and even some minor psychic occurrences. At first, these abilities were dismissed as side effects of the Oteries' psychic attacks. But as time went on, more and more people began to exhibit unusual traits. The idea that humans were somehow evolving mentally, a collective psychic evolution, became a popular theory. People across the world, from scientists to mystics, began to study this phenomenon. Could the Oteri have accidentally triggered a new phase in human development, one that could unlock untold potential? At the heart of this theory was the concept of psychic resonance. Some believed that when humanity united to resist the Oteri's fear-based attack, we inadvertently triggered a psychic link that enhanced our collective consciousness. This link, if nurtured and developed, could lead to abilities beyond anything we had previously imagined. Telepathy, telekinesis, and even the ability to communicate across vast distances using only the mind. No one knew the full extent of these powers or whether they could be controlled. Some feared that the very same abilities that had helped us defeat the Oteri could be used against us. Others were hopeful, believing that these new capabilities could elevate humanity to a level of understanding and unity never before seen. For now, Research was in its early stages, but the potential for a new era of human cognitive abilities was undeniable. As we ventured deeper into the cosmos, humanity was not only exploring the universe, we were changing the very nature of what it meant to be human. A new cosmic threat. The mysterious force. As the Odyssey fleet prepared for its first interstellar mission, a new, unforeseen challenge loomed. There was growing evidence that something was watching us. Something older and more powerful than the Oteri. The fragments of the Oteri transmission spoke of a force that had been awakened. Could it be that the Oteri had been merely a pawn in a much larger game? The Oteri had been the first to test humanity, but they would not be the last. The galaxy was full of ancient civilizations, many of which were far older and more powerful than anything we had encountered. If the Oteri's warning was any indication, humanity was on the verge of encountering something far more formidable than psychological warfare. And so, as we looked to the stars, the question remained, who or what were we truly up against? The Oteri had been a challenge, yes, but they had been only the beginning. The transmission spoke of something far greater. A force that was now aware of humanity's potential and perhaps determined to stop us from reaching it. The Oteri may have retreated, but the true struggle for humanity's place in the cosmos had only just begun. The dawn of a new cosmic order. Humanity's victory over the Oteri had been a turning point. A reminder of our resilience, our ingenuity, and our ability to face down the darkest forces in the universe. But it also marked the beginning of a new phase in our evolution. We were no longer simply explorers of space. We were participants in a larger cosmic drama, one that involved forces beyond our comprehension. What we had learned in our struggle with the Oteri was this: the universe was not a place of endless, uncaring chaos. It was a place where power, knowledge, and will intersected in ways we had yet to fully understand. Our minds, once thought to be fragile, had become our greatest weapon. And as we stood on the precipice of a new age of discovery, we had one certainty: we would never face the unknown with fear again. The stars were no longer distant, cold objects in the sky. The stars were no longer distant, cold objects in the sky. They were the next frontier, a challenge, and an invitation to the next chapter of humanity's story. And whether the Oteri had been the first or the last to test us, one thing was clear: humanity was ready for whatever came next. Part 6. The Odyssey begins. 3 sentence. The first departure. It was the dawn of a new era. After centuries of stargazing and speculative dreams of interstellar travel, humanity finally stood at the precipice of the unknown, ready to take its first steps beyond the solar system. The Odyssey fleet, Humanity's most advanced interstellar armada was ready to launch. The fleet consisted of 5 colossal ships, each designed for different objectives. The Eos, the flagship, was a command vessel outfitted with cutting-edge technology, AI systems, and research labs. Alongside it were 4 other ships: the Lumen S, a science and exploration ship; the Vanguard, a defense cruiser; the Zephyr, an agricultural research vessel; and the Astra, dedicated to medical and biological studies. Together, they formed humanity's first real exploration force, tasked with searching the galaxy for new worlds, alien life, and answers to the mysteries that had been stirring ever since the Otari's retreat. As the ships broke orbit and disappeared into the stars, humanity watched from Earth, holding its breath. The world had changed since the Otari invasion. We were no longer the timid, vulnerable species we once were. The war had forged us into something else, a species determined to explore, to expand, to evolve. But as the fleet ventured further into the darkness of space, it became clear that the galaxy was not the empty, barren expanse we had once believed. It was teeming with secrets, ancient, dormant forces just waiting for the right moment to stir. The arrival in the expanse. After several months of travel, the Odyssey fleet arrived at the edge of a mysterious region of space known as the Expanse, a vast, uncharted part of the galaxy that had long been avoided by the few other civilizations aware of it. The Expanse was not only physically vast, stretching across hundreds of light years, but it was also filled with anomalies, distorted gravitational fields, unusual radiation patterns, and strange electromagnetic signals. The fleet's science ship, the Lumen, took the first scans of the region, discovering that the Expanse was a nexus of unusual cosmic phenomena. The readings were beyond anything humanity had ever encountered. Hints of ancient technology hidden within the electromagnetic patterns, suggesting that the Expanse had once been home to a civilization far older than the Otari, or any other known species in the galaxy. Captain Naira Holden, commander of the Eos, ordered the fleet to venture deeper into the Expanse, determined to find answers. But as they navigated deeper, the fleet began to experience strange disturbances. The Vanguard reported disruptions in its AI systems, while the Zephyr detected irregular fluctuations in its food supply due to a mysterious force field surrounding one of the nearby planets. And the most disturbing reports came from the Astra, the medical ship, which began to record unexplained fluctuations in human biology, including sudden, unexplainable bursts of psychic energy among the crew members. Humanity's first steps into the expanse were not just a scientific expedition. They were a step into the unknown, into a place where the laws of physics itself seemed to bend and twist. The psychic link intensifies as the fleet pressed further into the expanse. It became apparent that the Otarians' psychic manipulations had left a deeper mark on humanity than anyone had anticipated. The psychic link that had been formed during the war, the one that allowed us to resist the Otarians' mind control, was beginning to grow stronger. ... blank. At first, it was subtle. Crew members would experience shared dreams, sudden bursts of understanding, a sense of someone else's presence in their mind. But soon, the link began to evolve. One crew member, Lieutenant Alana Drake of the EOS, reported hearing voices in her head, not her own thoughts, but the thoughts of someone or something else. Her mind would occasionally snap into what she described as a collective consciousness, as if all the crew members were experiencing the same moment in time, sharing the same vision. As this psychic phenomenon grew stronger, the fleet began to experience strange synchronicities. Equipment would malfunction in perfect harmony across the ships, as if some unseen force was influencing their systems. The shared dreams became more vivid, often depicting images of ancient ruins, alien landscapes, and the presence of a powerful, unfeeling entity lurking in the dark reaches of space. The realization hit them slowly. The expanse wasn't just a vast, empty region of space. It was alive. And somehow, the energy there was awakening something deep within humanity, something tied to the psychic resonance that the Otari had unleashed, an ancient warning. The first encounter, the first signs of contact, came when the fleet encountered an immense structure, something that appeared to be the remains of an ancient alien civilization. It was a vast, spherical object, floating silently in the vast emptiness of the expanse. The structure had once been a thriving hub, but now it was a ruin, half destroyed and abandoned. When the Lumen attempted to approach the structure, they found something unexpected. The ship's sensors began to pick up strange readings, not just in terms of radiation, but also in psychic energy. It was as if the very structure itself was sending out a kind of signal, one that resonated directly with the crew's evolving psychic abilities. Dr. Ethan Zhang, the Lumen's lead scientist, was the first to realize what they had stumbled upon. The structure was not just a physical object. The moment the fleet's ships docked with the ancient station, they were flooded with visions of the ancient alien race that had once inhabited the expanse. These beings were not like the Otiri, with their psychological manipulations. Instead, they had evolved to exist in a state of pure mental energy. they had achieved a form of collective consciousness that transcended physical bodies. But in the end, it was their hubris that had led to their downfall. They had used their powers to dominate and control other civilizations. But in the process, they had awakened something even older and more dangerous, an entity that consumed their minds and turned them into mindless drones. The message was clear. The Expanse is a place of power, but it is also a place of danger. Those who seek to control it may find themselves consumed. Apollo, the entity in the dark. As the fleet's scientists began to analyze the structure, they uncovered something more disturbing. An entity. It was not a being made of flesh and blood, but a consciousness. An ancient, powerful intelligence that had been dormant in the Expanse for eons, and it had been awakened. The entity's influence spread slowly at first, manipulating the crew's minds. At night, some would wake up in cold sweats, hearing strange whispers in their ears. Others began to experience visions, terrifying, mind-bending images of a vast, incomprehensible universe, stretching beyond the limits of time and space. Lieutenant Alana Drake, who had already been sensitive to psychic phenomena, was the first to make contact. She reported feeling the entity's presence in her mind, its voice more insistent and demanding. It spoke of an ancient war, a battle for control of the galaxy that had raged long before humanity's existence. The entity, an ancient consciousness, had once been a part of the galactic network that the Oteri had served. It had watched, waited, and manipulated countless civilizations, including the Oteri. But now it was trying to break free from the Expanse. The choice, to conquer or to flee. As the fleet's commanders debated their next move, the question became clear. Should they continue to explore the Expanse and risk unleashing the entity on the galaxy, or should they turn back and leave the mysteries of the Expanse behind? The debate was heated. Captain Nira Holden, a fierce advocate of exploration, wanted to push forward, believing that humanity could harness the entity's power and learn from its knowledge. But others, like Dr. Zhang, feared that it was too dangerous. The entity was ancient and cunning. If they unleashed it, it could spell the end of human civilization. In the end, the decision was made to attempt a delicate balance. The fleet would retreat from the Expanse, but not without taking the knowledge of the ancient structure with them. They would learn from it, study it, and prepare themselves for whatever came next. For the first time in history, humanity was forced to reckon with something larger than itself, something far older, more powerful, and far more dangerous than they had ever imagined. As the fleet pulled away from the expanse, a sense of unease settled over the crew. They had uncovered something that they weren't ready to face. Something that might one day come for them. But for now, the unknown stretched out before them, just beyond their reach. Then, a wall, the future, uncharted paths. With the fleet retreating from the expanse, humanity was left with a choice: to continue pushing into the cosmos, facing the dangers of the unknown, or to solidify their newfound place among the stars and build their future. The entity was still out there, waiting. The Expanse, Part 7, The Return and the Rising Shadows. A fleet that's changed forever. The journey back to Earth was long, a painful reminder of the unknown perils that awaited in the far reaches of space. The Odyssey fleet had ventured into the expanse with the goal of expanding humanity's horizons. But now, it returned with the knowledge of something far darker, more ancient, and incomprehensible. Humanity had touched the edges of something that could change the course of its entire existence. Captain Naira Holden paced the bridge of the Eos, her eyes fixed on the stars through the observation window. The mission had been a success, yes, but the crew had been changed. The Odyssey fleet had ventured beyond the edge of the known universe and brought back more than just scientific data. They had encountered a force, a being, a consciousness that no human mind was truly prepared for. And while they had fled, they knew that they couldn't forget what they had discovered. That thing in the expanse, that entity. It wasn't something they could leave behind. It had planted itself in their minds, and its reach extended beyond the stars. The fleet arrived back at Earth in a state of cautious optimism. The world was still recovering from the Oteri War, but the Odyssey fleet's return should have been a cause for celebration. Instead, it felt like a warning. Earth's leaders greeted the fleet with open arms, yet there was a palpable unease in the air. The fleet's scientists and commanders were eager to share their findings, but their reports were fragmented. Some of them spoke of ancient alien civilizations, others about the entity itself, the force that had begun to make contact with the fleet's crew through their shared psychic link. It was clear to everyone involved that the Oteri were not the only race to have played with the minds of others, and this new entity was proof that the galactic powers, ancient, powerful, and indifferent, had far more in store for humanity than anyone could imagine. One of the most profound consequences of the fleet's journey into the expanse was the intensification of humanity's psychic link, the shared dreams, heightened intuition, and psychic bursts experienced by the crew members were no longer isolated to just those who had been directly exposed to the expanse. Back on Earth, people all over the world began to report similar experiences. At first, it was dismissed as mass hysteria, or the lingering effects of the war. But soon, it became undeniable. Humans, ordinary people, without the mental training or the alien exposure that the fleet's crew had undergone, began to experience the same phenomena. Psychometric abilities, telepathic connections, and inexplicable visions were no longer a rarity, but an emerging reality. Some even began to claim they could hear the thoughts of others from across the world, or that they could predict events before they occurred. There were those who feared these new abilities, who saw them as a dangerous side effect of humanity's interaction with the Otaries' mental warfare. Others saw it as a sign of humanity's next step, a kind of evolutionary leap forward. But as the abilities grew stronger, they also began to grow more unpredictable. Psychic phenomena were often erratic, uncontrollable. The more people tried to harness their newfound powers, the more destabilizing the effects became. Some began to lose control of their minds, slipping into deep psychotic episodes where the boundaries between their thoughts and the thoughts of others blurred. Governments and institutions scrambled to contain what they now termed the psychic contagion, an unprecedented phenomenon that could either bring about a new age of human potential or destroy civilization as it was known. The military was already developing countermeasures to neutralize those with the most extreme abilities, while others proposed creating specialized psychic training programs to teach control. But there were whispers among the highest echelons of power that the emergence of psychic abilities might not be a natural evolution at all. Some believed the Otaries' manipulation had merely accelerated a process already set into motion by the ancient entity in the expanse. Was humanity's ascent into psychic power an accidental byproduct of the Otaries' attack, or was it part of a much larger cosmic design? The first sign that humanity was being watched came from an unlikely source. The Syndra, a species of humanoid beings with a strong telepathic culture, contacted Earth. They were curious, intrigued by humanity's rapid psychic development. The Syndra were an ancient species, once thriving in the galactic networks that spanned the expanse. They had lost contact with many of their allies after the entity began to awaken, and their once dominant position had begun to slip. Their message was simple, but laden with warning. You have stirred the Silent One, and now the shadows will come for you. The Syndra offered their knowledge, an alliance, in exchange for access to humanity's new psychic potential. They claimed to possess the keys to understanding the entity that had awakened in the expanse, and they were willing to share them with Earth. But the price was steep. The Syndra wanted to use humanity's growing psychic abilities to restore their fallen empire and maintain their hold over the galactic network. The offer was tempting. Too tempting for some. But not all humanity was convinced. There were factions within Earth's leadership that remained distrustful of the Syndra. They had watched from the sidelines as the galaxy's ancient races had played their games, and they feared that aligning with the Syndra would place humanity under another yoke of control. They preferred to take the knowledge offered by the Syndra, but without the strings attached. These factions argued that humanity had proven itself to be capable of standing on its own. No alliances, no strings. But the Syndra's warning about the Silent One couldn't be ignored. The entity, it seemed, had a reach that extended far beyond the expanse, and its influence was already beginning to spread, reaching out to other civilizations that had once been its allies. Now, humanity's very existence was a key part of the galactic struggle, and there was no turning back. The Great Convergence, an unstoppable force. As humanity faced its internal crises, fears of psychic control, rising tension with the Syndra, and the uncertainty surrounding their growing powers, another, even more dangerous force began to take shape. Unknown to Earth, in the dark corners of the galaxy, an alliance of ancient civilizations, long united under the Silent One's control, was starting to converge. The first signs of this galactic coalition came from unusual transmissions intercepted by Earth's space observatories, patterns of encrypted signals emanating from several distant star systems. These signals were not just data, they were a form of communication, one that appeared to be coordinated across multiple species. It was as if the galaxy's ancient powers were coming together, drawn to a single purpose. And that purpose was the destruction or subjugation of humanity. The transmissions pointed to a single truth. The Silent One had awakened fully, and it was now gathering its forces. The entity, once a powerful consciousness lost to the void, was no longer content to remain in the expanse. It had set its sights on Earth, and it would stop at nothing to regain control over the minds of every living being in the galaxy. The time for diplomacy, alliances, and peaceful exploration was running out. The galaxy was entering a new era, one where humanity would no longer be just a passive observer, but a central player in a conflict far larger than any single civilization. The Syndra's warnings were no longer just warnings. They were prophecies. As the fleets of the galaxy began to converge on Earth, a choice lay before humanity. Would they submit to the will of these ancient forces, or would they fight to maintain their newfound independence, even if it meant facing the full fury of the Silent One's galaxy-spanning dominion? Part 8. The Final Stand. The Gathering Storm. It was a moment of profound tension, a fragile piece hanging in the balance as the ancient galactic forces began to assemble at the edge of the solar system. The Odyssey fleet was not alone. The vastness of space was teeming with fleets of alien races: the Syndra, the Ycalians, the HFY, ancient species long thought to be mere shadows of their former selves. Yet, under the guidance of the Silent One, they had been reawakened. And now, they were marching toward Earth. On Earth, fear and uncertainty had gripped the world. The psychic powers humanity had begun to develop were now both a gift and a curse. People were more connected than ever, their minds linked through a shared consciousness. But the entity, the Silent One, was also tapping into those very connections. It was feeding off humanity's psychic energy, growing stronger by the day. The very minds of Earth's population were under siege. Captain Naira Holden stood before the holographic map of the solar system aboard the Eos. The Odyssey fleet had been bolstered by reinforcements. Ships from Earth's newly formed space defense forces, the last remnants of the old Oteri warships, and the newly awakened psychic powers of humanity. But it wasn't enough. The enemy forces were vast. It was clear that they were here not just for Earth, but to reclaim their dominance over the galaxy. Humanity was caught between two choices: submit to the will of these ancient beings, or fight and risk everything. The psychic battlefield. Lieutenant Alana Drake, whose psychic abilities had grown more potent after the fleet's encounter with the Expanse, had become the focal point of Earth's psychic defense. She had been in constant communication with the fleet's scientists and engineers, but even her abilities were stretched to their limits. The more she tried to connect with the psychic force of the enemy, the more the boundaries between her own mind and theirs blurred. She was no longer just fighting to protect Earth. She was fighting to keep herself intact. The Silent One's power was immense, its consciousness vast, but it had underestimated humanity's one unique trait: their ability to resist, to endure. As the fleet moved toward the confrontation zone, Captain Holden called for one final strategy session. "This is our moment," she said, her voice steady, but with an edge of resolve. "They think they've already won, but they've underestimated us. They think we're just a species of weak, fractured minds. But they're wrong. We are stronger than they'll ever understand." Alana was the key. She had grown so attuned to the psychic network that she could now hear the Silent One's thoughts, feel its influence, even glimpse its true form: an amorphous, shifting mass of pure mental energy. It wasn't a creature in the traditional sense. It was a force, an idea, an ancient sentience that fed on chaos, control, and fear. She had been preparing for this. Humanity's ability to laugh in the face of fear, to find hope in the darkest places. was their greatest weapon. The Silent One couldn't understand that. It was trapped in its own desire for control, unable to fathom the chaotic, resilient strength of human will. Dot. The battle of minds. The battle unfolded not in the void of space, but within the very fabric of the mind. As the enemy's forces descended on Earth, they unleashed a psychic storm, a wave of fear, nightmares, and mental domination. Ships in orbit, once invulnerable, began to experience massive system failures. Crew members screamed, clutching their heads as they were bombarded by psychic visions. Visions that were designed to break their spirits. But humanity did not break. Instead, something incredible happened. As the Silent One's forces began their psychic onslaught, humanity fought back, not with weapons or technology, but with a unity born of their collective resilience. The psychic link that had once been a source of confusion and fear had now become a source of strength. The people of Earth, their minds linked in ways that had never been possible before, formed an unbreakable bond. Alana stood in the center of this psychic battlefield, her consciousness intertwined with the rest of humanity's. The collective mind was a roiling sea of emotion, hope, fear, and defiance. She felt every thought, every heartbeat, every ounce of resistance as humanity fought back against the invasion. The Silent One, sensing the sudden surge of power in the collective, faltered. It had expected fear, resentment, despair, but instead it encountered something it had never anticipated: unity. In the heart of the battle, Alana closed her eyes and focused. She reached out with her mind, pushing against the Silent One, forcing it to feel the one thing it could never understand: the strength of human will. We will not be controlled, she thought, sending the message to every person on Earth. We are not slaves to fear. The Silent One recoiled, its mental influence weakening as the collective resistance of humanity grew stronger. The energy field that had once felt suffocating, all-encompassing, began to dissipate. The final decision. But there was one final choice to make. Earth's leaders, working in tandem with the fleet, had developed a last resort weapon, a device capable of severing the psychic connection between the Silent One and its allies, essentially locking them out of the collective consciousness. However, activating it would require a human volunteer to remain in the heart of the psychic network, channeling the energy necessary to trigger the device. This volunteer would have to stay within the psychic storm, holding it at bay long enough for the weapon to deploy. It would be a one-way mission. Alana Drake, having fought through the storm of the Silent One's influence, was the natural choice, but she knew the cost. she would have to sever the link permanently, to remain alone in the void of her own mind forever. The last barrier between the entity and Earth's survival. "I'm ready," Alana said, her voice calm, yet filled with an unshakable determination. "We've come this far. I'm not going to let them win." The final sacrifice. As Alana moved toward the device, the psychic storm raged around her. The Silent One's forces had become erratic, confused by the unexpected unity that was overwhelming their power. They were fighting amongst themselves, unable to comprehend the wave of resistance they were facing. Alana's mind, once filled with uncertainty and fear, was now a beacon of clarity. She activated the device. For a moment, the universe seemed to pause. The stars flickered. The minds of humanity seemed to hold their breath. And then, with a deafening psychic pulse, the barrier shattered. The Silent One, for the first time in its existence, was cut off from its control over the galaxy. The psychic storm that had been brewing for so long collapsed in on itself. The alien fleets, their minds cut off from the Silent One's influence, disintegrated into chaos. The ancient races that had once dominated the galaxy now found themselves powerless, stranded in the void. Alana's last conscious thought was not one of fear, but of peace. She had done it. Humanity had won. Not because of superior technology, not because of a greater army, but because they had fought together. They had resisted, endured, and ultimately triumphed over the greatest force the galaxy had ever known. A new era. In the aftermath of the battle, Earth began to rebuild. The galaxy's ancient powers, now broken, began to fade into the background of galactic history. The Silent One, cut off from its control, retreated into the darkness, never to rise again. Humanity had proven something remarkable, that no force in the universe, no matter how ancient or powerful, could break them. They had shown the galaxy what it meant to fight with resilience, unity, and indomitable will. They had become more than just a species. They had become a force of their own, a power to be reckoned with. The Odyssey fleet returned home as heroes, but the work was far from over. The future of humanity lay not just in the stars, but in their ability to continue evolving, to harness the power within themselves, and to protect the fragile unity they had built. Earth was no longer just a small blue dot in the void of space. It was a beacon of hope. The final message of the Odyssey fleet would echo through the galaxy. They tried to break us with fear. We laughed. They tried to control us with their minds. We stood together. ... And with that, humanity's story had just begun. End of story. End of story.